Hey there friends, it's Laurie. Today I'm sharing 3 new easy and cute fall DIYs. I use supplies from Dollar Tree as well as a few other things. And as always, I hope you have fun crafting with me, so let's get busy. To make my fall Scarecrow girl, I'm starting with a 12-inch wooden circle from the Dollar Tree. I'm adding on a different hanger, so I removed the one that came with it. I'm covering the circle using a Scarecrow chair cover, and this came from the Dollar Tree as well. I'm removing the fringe that's mimicking the Scarecrow's hair. You can always use a seam ripper, but my scissors were handy, so I just ended up using those. Both of the braids are attached to the fringe, so they'll be removed as well. Be sure to hang on to this fringe because we'll be adding it back onto the Scarecrow. My next step is cutting the hat away from the Scarecrow's face. I'll be adding this piece back onto the Scarecrow as well. I'm attaching her face onto the wooden circle and I'm using a glue stick. This works great, but you can always use a spray adhesive. I just didn't have any on hand. Using the glue stick, I added a generous amount onto the wood. I then attached the Scarecrow's face, making sure that it was centered on the circle. Happy with its placement, I then pressed it down and let it dry completely. Now that it's dry, I'm cutting about a ½ inch or so away from the wooden circle. You can always cut it a little larger. You just need enough of the fabric to be able to fold it over the sides and then attach it onto the back. When I was done, that's exactly what I did. I added some hot glue onto the back of the circle and then folded over the sides. The hot glue is super hot, so to be sure that I didn't burn my fingers, I added on a finger protector. If you don't have any, they do sell 3 in a pack at the Dollar Tree. You can always leave her face as is. I'm using some of the Dollar Tree nautical rope to give it more of a finished edge. I placed down some waxed paper and added a line of hot glue onto the side of the Scarecrow's face. I then attached one end of the nautical rope and worked my way around her face. I didn't make a complete circle because I'll be adding on some hair and her hat. If you can't find the Scarecrow at the Dollar Tree, you can always paint her face on. I'm using some raffia that I already had on hand, and I'm using about 30 inches or so. I'm using 2 shorter pieces, wrapping them around and tying them off to hold the raffia together. I left about 6 inches between both, and these will end up being the Scarecrow's bangs. I decided the placement of the hair on the Scarecrow's face and then hot glued it into place. With that complete, I'm going to add on her hat, but I first need to remove the stitching from both of the sides. When I'm done, I'm also removing the bow. I decided where I wanted the hat on her head, turned it over, and attached both sides onto the back. The top is now crisscrossing over itself, and I'm attaching those 2 pieces together. I'm folding over the back of the hat to form a triangle, and then attaching those 2 pieces together. Now that I'm done, you'll see there's a leftover opening on the top of the hat, and this is where I'm hot gluing in some extra raffia. I added some into the bottom and the top, and when I was done, I gave it a little haircut. I also used my scissors and cut a bit of the raffia under the top of the hat to make some bangs. I added some hot glue onto the raffia and attached the hat. I'm now using that fringe that I originally removed from the hat. To attach it, you can always gather it and hot glue it onto the back, but I'm using a needle and thread. After securing it on one end, I weaved my needle through it, so when I was done, it looked like an accordion. Once the fabric filled my needle, I pulled the thread through and then continued on. When I was done, I spaced it out a bit and then tied off the end. After I found its placement under the bottom edge of the Scarecrow, I then hot glued it into place. To accent my Scarecrow, I'm using some fall leaves from this Dollar Tree garland. I'm attaching 3 orange and 2 red to my Scarecrow's hat. Happy with their placement, I used my hot glue gun and attached them. For the center, I'm attaching a red sunflower along with its leaves. I'm cutting 2 short pieces of raffia and making braids on my Scarecrow. When I'm done, I'm using the piece of raffia to tie off each end. To finish off the braids, you can make 2 bows out of ribbon. I'm actually using 4 of the Dollar Tree fall leaves. I'm using 2 of the orange and 2 of the yellow, attaching 1 of each color where I tied off the braids. With all that complete, I used my scissors and neatened up the ends of the braids. To finish up, I turned my Scarecrow over. Using some of the leftover nautical rope, I decided how long I wanted the hanger to be, and then I hot glued it into place. I think this is a cheap to cute DIY that will work throughout the fall season, all the way to Thanksgiving. If you're new to my channel, please consider clicking on that little red subscribe button below and leaving me a thumbs up. To all my returning friends, YouTube has been unsubscribing people from their favorite channels. It's actually happened to me in the last few months, so please take a quick moment and make sure you're still subscribed to my channel. I don't want to lose you. You are all very special to me, and I can't wait to chat with everyone down below in the comments. To make my country apple pie, I'm starting with 3 foam dice from the Dollar Tree. Mine happen to be red, but any color will work. To make them easier to paint, I'm pushing a wooden skewer into the center. I'm using a red acrylic paint and giving them all a coat. Instead of painting, you can also cover them with a red balloon, and that's another option. When I'm done, I stand mine up in an empty jar. My dice are dry, and I'm going to turn them into apples. I'm first making the stems, and I'm cutting 3 3-inch pieces out of a stick that I found outdoors. I used a little muscle and pushed each stem into the center of each apple. I'm adding on 6 leaves, and I'm using some from this stem. It originally came from Temu, and these remind me of apple leaves. I hot glued 2 around each of the stems, and because the top apple will sit on the bottom 2, I made sure to place the leaves in a good place so the top apple will sit level on the bottom 2. I'm adding letters onto my apples, and I'm using them from this Dollar Tree wooden pack. I'm using the letters P-I-E and painting them with my golden brown acrylic paint. I'm attaching the letters to the front of my apples using some craft glue. I think these apples are so cute with the letters, but if you decide you want to add them to other decor, all you need to do is turn them around and they'll work as plain apples. I'm using a strand of raffia to accent the top. I tied the piece into 3 simple bows. I then used my glue gun and attached one onto the stem of each apple. I decided to make a pie riser to hold my apples. It first needs to be flat, so I'm starting with a 7-inch wooden circle from the Dollar Tree. You can always paint it. I'm covering mine and I'm using some red and tan gingham check fabric. I already had this on hand. You can find it at Hobby Lobby. I placed the circle down on it and cut it out. I did give myself a little extra room. Attaching the fabric to the wood, you can always use a spray adhesive. I didn't have any on hand, so I'm using a glue stick. After adding on a generous amount, I placed the glue side down onto the fabric. I then pressed it down, and when I was done, I turned it over and I pressed down the sides. I made sure the glue was completely dry, and now I'm trimming off the extra fabric. To make the pattern on the top of my pie, I'm using some cotton fabric as the crust. I cut 8 strips, and I definitely wasn't fussy when I was doing it. They measure about 3/4 of an inch wide and 9 inches long. You'll also need about a 54-inch by 1-inch piece of fabric, but depending on how big your loops are on the outside of the pie will determine how much you need. I'm staining the fabric to match the paint on my letters. I brewed some hot coffee, placed in the strips, and let them soak for about 2 hours. When they were done to dry the fabric, I placed them flat on a tin-foiled cookie sheet. I preheated my oven to 250 degrees. I turned it off and then placed them inside. They were dry in just about 5 minutes. To make the lattice top, I'm first placing down 4 pieces. I did my best and tried to space them as evenly as possible, and now I'm weaving in my last 4. In addition to staining the fabric with coffee, you can also add in a little cinnamon, and that makes the pie smell really good. With all 8 pieces in place, I need to keep the fabric as flat as possible, so I'm using the same craft glue and attaching them to the circle. You could also use a glue gun, but sometimes it leaves some lumps and bumps under the fabric, and your apples, they won't sit flat on top of the pie. With the lattice in place, I'm turning my pie over and attaching all the tabs to the bottom. To make the outside crust on my pie, I'm using 2 pieces of fabric. One is 36 inches and the other 18. After adding a dot of hot glue onto the pie, I placed down one end of the fabric. About an inch to the right, I added a dot of hot glue and folded the fabric over to make a flat loop. I continued this same pattern, making a crimped edge as I worked my way around the pie. I tried to make each of the loops about the same size, but just like when you make a homemade pie, sometimes the outside crust isn't always perfect. Every few inches, I did add hot glue under the fabric, attaching the crimped edge to the pie. I added on the last strip of fabric to finish up my pie. The pie top is complete, and so to hide those tabs on the bottom, I'm turning it over and painting it with the same golden brown acrylic paint that I used on the letters. I'm giving my risers some feet. I'm using 4 wooden beads and I painted them in the matching color. I added 4 dots of hot glue onto the bottom of the pie and attached the 4 beads. With everything complete, all that's left to do is add the apples onto my pie. This is definitely a cheap to cute DIY. It smells really good and I hope you love it as much as I do. Getting started, I'm using 2 different size pumpkins from the Dollar Tree. The red dots on the tags, they're hiding the original price before they raised them. But I guess all in all, they're still a pretty good deal. I'm removing the stem from each, but hang on to those because we'll be replacing them in the end. I already have a hole in the top from where I removed the stem. Using my scissors, I'm making a hole in the bottom. We'll end up using this later as well. I'm covering them with some fabric that I already had on hand, as well as 4 different patterns that I found at the Dollar Tree. I want the fabric pieces to have a bit of a decorative edge, so I'm using my scalloped pinking shears. I cut random sizes of rectangles and squares out of the different patterns of fabric. I didn't have any set plan, but I did keep the pieces on the smaller side. I cut a bunch of pieces out of the different fabrics, and I'm using my Mod Podge to attach them to the pumpkins. This part is so fun and easy. I placed some Mod Podge onto the pumpkin, then started adding on the different patterns of the fabric. Once I had them in place, I then added a bit of Mod Podge onto the top. Some of the pieces will land in the creases. I made sure to push them down and in to keep the shape of the pumpkin. I kept adding on the fabric and working my way around. My pumpkin is completely covered in fabric, and I'm giving it one more coat of Mod Podge. While this one is drying, I'm going to decorate my second pumpkin. I decided to cover this one in the plaid fabric only. Once again, I added on the Mod Podge and attached the small pieces of fabric. Just like the other pumpkin, once I had it completely covered in fabric, I added on a coat of Mod Podge. They're both completely dry, and I'm going to use some of the Dollar Tree jute to add on an accent. I placed one end on the top hole and measured it to the bottom hole. I added on just about an extra inch. I counted the sections on the pumpkin. There are 8, so I cut 7 more pieces of jute. I placed some hot glue inside the top hole on the pumpkin. I then started adding in the jute one piece at a time. As I'm adding them, to keep them inside the hole, I'm using a dowel and pushing them down inside. With those in place, I'm turning my pumpkin over and adding some hot glue into the bottom hole. I'm pulling the jute one piece at a time in between the pumpkin sections and tucking it tightly into the hole, and I'm using the dowel to help push them down inside. Now that I'm done, I'm following the same instructions for my shorter pumpkin. It has 10 separate sections, so I cut 10 pieces of jute and attached them on the top and on the bottom. I'm accenting the tops of both of the pumpkins. I'm adding on some leaves from this Dollar Tree fall pack. Near where the stem will go, I hot glued a leaf onto each. I have 2 bunches of berries. These are actually left over from a Dollar Tree garland, and I'm adding them onto my pumpkins. I'm finishing up by adding a second leaf to each pumpkin and then replacing their stems. These pumpkins were inexpensive to make, and you have fabric left over that you can use on other projects. I really hope you like them, and I think they're a high-end alternative to a plain orange pumpkin. Here we are at the end of the video, and I truly hope no matter where you may live, you can pop some fall colors into your home. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you're new, once again, don't forget to click that little red subscribe button below. I'll leave a bunch of fall-inspired DIYs for you at the end of this video, and my wish for all of you is that you have a safe and an amazing day. And until next time, bye everybody!